Hello, everyone. How you doing? My name is Anthony. I hope that you are all well. Today, throughout your session, you're going to hear a lot about the CRIOP tool. The CRIOP is an observation tool. It's broken up into several sections or pillars. Today, the focus of many of the sessions will be on pillar one and pillar two. Pillar one, focus on classroom relationships. So how do you affirm and validate children? How do you build trust and rapport, particularly during this unique school year? And we're actually going to link in a podcast by Dr. Bettina Love and her partner, Chelsea, I believe is her name, Chelsea Cully Love. Yep. And they'll talk about building trust and what it takes to kind of build that trust. And I'll also be highlighting some of that, while I'm speaking. So CRIOP, if you're not familiar with it, uh, the acronym CRIOP stands for Culturally Responsive Instruction Observation Protocol, and it's really not, it highlights certain practices, but it's really not like boxes that you check off. It's something that it's like awareness. It's something that you just need to be conscious of, and always try to bring or always try to have in your forefront. So today, while you're going through your sessions, even in the sessions where they're not highlighting or making a direct connection to the CRIOP tool, excuse me, I really want you to think about, how um, you yourself can make those connections. So yes, pillar one is classroom relationships. And I'll just read off one of the indicators here, but something like, teacher demonstrates an ethic of care. You're demonstrating that you care for your students, for your families. And the second pillar um, is family collaboration. So how can you create open communication with families, developing partnerships with parents and caregivers, and valuing funds of knowledge? And, I'll talk a little bit about that, but also that's some of that is highlighted in that podcast that we're going to share, the clip of the podcast. And let me just read off one indicator here. The educator establishes genuine partnerships with parents slash caregivers, families, right? So how do you actually develop these partnerships? What do you need to do um, mentally, emotionally? And we'll get at some of those shifts. Okay, so before we dive into any of this, I would like you to close your eyes and just think back to your old classroom. Uh, think of everything you cherished, and adored. Maybe think of particular students you had in a class, or your physical classroom, or the people in the building that you saw, the systems and structures you had in your classroom, and how smooth they were running. Sit there for a second. Now think about the stressors and what wasn't working well um, during that time. You know, the maybe the routine was too tight. It was just the pacing was tough to keep up. Parking, maybe it was just hard to park and get to your school. Um, maybe that student who's on the bus, whose family you're having a difficult time establishing, lines communication. You're texting, you're emailing, you're calling, you're trying to meet them in different places, just trying to build that bond. But think about that. Now think about March, last March, and when COVID shut everything down, and everything that was happening during that time, everything people were saying during that time. Who has access to what? Remote learning is impossible. Not everyone has a laptop. This isn't going to work. Think of the effort you put in. I don't know how many people volunteered for Boston to deliver those laptops, but a lot, or to gather supplies, do some of these kits that went out for summer school. Think about summer school, the work that went into that. Everything you did to kind of get this off of the ground. Now, I want you to hold that picture in your mind, both the things that were going well, things that weren't going well during COVID, before COVID. And I want you to let that memory fade. Let it dissipate like a puddle on a hot summer day, just gone. Let your mind be clear for a second. Imagine yourself walking into a new building, a mall, right? It's shiny, it's grand, everything's on sale. There's a Target. Think about how you're feeling in this space, the type of energy you're bringing to it. Are you happy? You smiling? Because we must begin anew and lead with joy and love in our hearts and minds. We're going to be doing something new here. We're going to get something new off the ground. It's important that when we go into it, we're not being um, held back by what we have or don't have. This is new. And children need to feel that energy that, oh, yeah, we're excited. We're going to do this new thing. And could you keep your high expectations, right? Of course. It's important that there's two things. It's important to keep your expectations high, so aim for the stars. But because we're doing something new, be okay with those days you land on the moon, right? There's going to be some tough days. Allow yourself not to be perfect. Have that internal control. Because this is going to be a learning process, right? And we have to kind of be in that modality, in that zone. So yes, bring something new, high expectations, but you can roll with the punches. Things aren't always going to go our way. And when you do that, when you allow yourself that, you give that to children. You give them the freedom to do the same. Okay, so what are we asking for here? What are we talking about when we're thinking of the CRIOP? I saw this post, I believe it was on Twitter, maybe Instagram, and I had to capture it. I had to share it. It wasn't striking to me as much as it definitely spoke to me. It's something that a reality I've always noticed, but I'll just share it. So this is a teacher who shared this. I had a student who was late to class come up to me afterward. "I'm sorry I was late," he said. "My mom died this morning and I didn't know where to go, so I came here." Now just think about that. Wow. Wow. And And that was the day I decided to treat every single student as if I have no idea what they're going through. Our students are facing a reality right now, even before COVID. But with COVID, those disparities are just very clear. And I'll go into that in a second. Um, but it's important that when you're talking to your students, when you're talking to your families, that you're really uh, you're really caring, um, and you're really thinking about how you're communicating to them. But in Dr. Bettina Love's podcast, she mentions this quote from Dr. Asa Hillard, and I'm going to share it with you right now because I think he has some insight onto what we need to do to to meet the needs of our students, especially in this pandemic. And it's not business as usual, right? We can't continue as if it's business as usual. It's not that. Like again, can we have high expectations? Yes. The expectations should always be high. That's not what I'm asking about though, right? Let me get at this quote here, sorry. I gotta move my photo. So Dr. Asa Hillard says, I have never encountered any children in any group who are not geniuses. There's no mystery on how to teach them. The first thing you do is treat them like human beings. The second thing you do is to love them. So think back to that child who just lost his mom, who's going to see his teacher. Is it important for that teacher to be like, all right, we're on chapter 5 and doing this? All right, and I'm not asking that you put the academics aside. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking when you're thinking academics, think beyond the numbers, think beyond the letters. All right, there's people in front of you. There are human beings in front of you. But what does that mean, right? The first thing you do is to treat them like human beings. What does it mean to be treated like a human being? Right? Students want to be acknowledged, they want to be heard, they want to feel safe, they want to feel welcomed. They should have full access to their emotions, to their humanity. Um, and going back to what we said about being okay when you land on the moon, when you allow yourself not to be perfect, you do, try your best and forget the rest. And sometimes things don't work out the way that you want it to. When you kind of are okay in that discomfort, I'm not perfect, but I'm still aiming to be. I'm still trying my best to be. I'm still trying to get these goals accomplished. You give that to children. You give them the right to do that. That things don't have to be aligned always. Things don't always have to be perfect, but you can still strive and accomplish these goals. All right, so let's dive in. You know, we're not just talking to uh, students, though, right? Most of the communication that's happening, especially now in COVID, is with families, is through families, right? So we really have to treat families like human beings as well and allow them full access to their emotions and their thinking, just like we would ourselves, just like we would our students. Let's take a quick snapshot of our student population in Boston Public Schools, about 75% of our students are Black and Latino. 42% of students are economically disadvantaged. 72% are economically disadvantaged. Sorry. And that's poverty line, below the poverty line. And 42.5% of students, their native language is not English. And though these are the biggest groups in our student population, those are the very populations that we fail, that we continuously fail. And this is before COVID, right? This is when institutions were operating at their highest. Think back to that first slide, or the slide where we were thinking about our past classrooms. This is in that setting when everything's running smooth, things are going well. These students were still falling through the cracks. So our families have a right to distrust schools and teachers. So when we talk to them, again, we need to talk to them like human beings. We need to meet them where they're at and hear their concerns and validate their perspective and thinking. So it's not just in our best interest to focus on relationships from day one. It is best practice. I'm going to play the clip from Dr. Bettina Love, and she talks a little bit about their approach in talking to families and students, but really focuses on building that trust and what that looks like. Let me see if I can play it here for you. Oh, I have it queued up here, actually. Right here.
Perfect. So let's move on to this idea of trust. So I think trust is going to be a major component as we move into online virtual space of schooling, because you need the parents in this space, right? I've following Twitter, and on Twitter, there's been so many conversations around, well, we need students to have on their uniforms. We need students not to be in their pajamas. We need students to do this. We need students to do that. And nobody's saying and having a conversation with the parents. We're in a space where if you're a first grader, who are all these emails going to? The children? No, they're going to the parents. And so you have to build a relationship of trust and love and care with the parents. We cannot be telling individuals what to do in their homes. We cannot be trying to police families in their own homes. We have to build a relationship. So tell us, how do you build this relationship with parents so they trust you, so they listen to you, and so that they feel as though we're in this together, particularly in this virtual space where we need the teachers and the parents to be on the same page right now?
So, families have the same right and same space to distrust us as teachers as the kids do. So building that trust with them is incredibly important. And I want them to know that my expectations of myself haven't shifted simply because we're in a virtual environment. And so being able to have those relationships is something that you have to start at day one. I know that last year, lots of times I would call and I'd have a conversation with a parent with the intent of having a session or be virtually meeting with a student. And I'd end up talking to the parents for 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And we just talk about, COVID hair care. We talk about COVID dreaming, what happens after the pandemic is over. We would talk about parenting and what we've experienced. And so that gave parents that place and space to know that I am a human, I am a teacher, I am a woman, I am a mother, I love their child, and I want the best for their children. And so the idea of, we can't police parents and families in their houses is exactly right. We have to have a mutual level of respect for each other, and that has to start from day one. So showing parents that you're there for them as well as the kids can be done by sending out surveys, by having phone calls. If you hear that the parents are having a hard time figuring out how to do something, reach out to them, talk to them. Don't just assume that the child isn't doing something because their parents aren't making them. There's so many different situations and everyone's household is different. And so we have to be open and honest to that. And we have to do that by reaching out and getting out of our own feelings of assuming that we know everything in everybody's space and what everybody is expecting and not expecting, and open up the conversation. And so you have to build that credibility with the students and with their parents in order to gain that trust, so that if you see something that's going on, you feel comfortable enough to call and say, hey, look, how are you doing? Let's start with that. Don't lead with, well, I noticed that. No, hey, how you doing? First, get that foundational level of respect open and flowing, and that should be coming from the schools, because like you said, the kids aren't getting emails, the parents are getting those emails. So if you start every email with your child wasn't, your child didn't, we're expecting that, how do you think someone is going to want to ride with you for the next 9 weeks, potentially a full year with this?
I got to open up the computer and see your face with this foolishness every single morning. I think, so it's so much about that. And it's also about this idea that we are going to get an intimate look into our students' lives and their homes and their families and their rooms. And we have to make sure we're not being judgmental. We have to make sure that we're not policing them. We have to make sure that this is a level of trust and intimacy that we have to feel privileged to be able to enter. And if there's not a level of trust there, then yeah, the student might turn their camera off and you can't see them.
All right. All right. So we talked about building trust. We talked about allowing yourself to kind of go with the punches, to not be perfect, but keep those high expectations. We talked about caring, right? And that how allowing yourself, giving the space for yourself to kind of strive and fail sometimes, and also frees up students and families to do the same. I'm picking one of the indicators from the family collaboration pillar, and just highlighting some of the things you can do that can meet that indicator. And I think Chelsea mentioned this too, but genuinely reach out and check in on how children and their families are doing. How are you, or how have you been, before addressing any academic issues goes a long way. And not that you don't mention the academic issues. I mean, you are an educator, you are educating their children, but that you should genuinely be checking in on your families to see how you're doing, especially in this pandemic, in these pandemics, right? Reaching out with weekly or monthly updates to inform families on what their children are doing, did, or will be working on. Maybe even establish common goals. So what are you trying to get done at home, and how could I support you? And this is an aim that I'm trying to have your child reach by the end of the semester. How could you support us in that? Right, really establishing that partnership. And I've seen a lot of this this spring, right, and this summer. Meeting at a coffee shop or setting up a remote coffee hour to check in, touch base, and get to know each other. And when you talk about academics, again, yes, of course you can, but this is just a platform where you can kind of be yourself, and the families can be themselves as well. All right. So hopefully I gave you some examples, and we talked a little bit about the shift in thinking and approach.